What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be checking out a video from Real Engineering. Is the metric system actually better? Now, this is something I've actually looked into a little bit before, but this will be the first time that Lindsay has ever learned basically anything about the metric system.
Yeah. I do remember in, I think it was like middle school, we spent a part of a day on
pretty much it, right?
On the metric system, but I didn't retain any of that. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that if you don't learn it when you're a kid, it doesn't really come intuitively.
Yeah, I feel like it's the whole use it or lose it thing.
It is.
If you're never taught, well, and if you're never taught to.
And it's like we live in a country that, granted, there are times that metric numbers are used. For example, when it comes to ammunition. Ammunition. That's one time. And there are numerous times like that. But for the most part, in your day-to-day life, here in the U.S., we don't generally use the metric system unless...
Now, sometimes like in recipes, a recipe will use like metric measurements, but I just whip out the scale and use that. I don't need to calculate it or figure out.
But I mean, there are people that obviously in the U.S. use the metric system, but I think they're more in certain engineering fields and things like that, where they're working, especially when you're working internationally, you're going to be working with the metric system with your European counterparts and so forth and so on. And so obviously some people in the U.S. do use the metric system, but I think on average as a whole, the average person probably generally doesn't necessarily use it in a way that they even understand that they're using the metric system when they think about it. Perhaps, if you're working on something with certain tools, you might be using metric at that point, but you're not thinking of it from the standpoint of I'm using the metric system, if that makes any sense. Yeah. So anyways, guys, the little bit I've looked into the metric system, in the past, it's probably been well before Lindsay was on the channel. And it's something that I've looked into it briefly, but again, it's not something I've really used, so it's not something I've fully grasped.
So you're going to be learning a little too.
Oh, absolutely. I'll be relearning or probably understanding something for the first time again or
Have you ever seen that meme? The meme where it's like Americans will use any form of measurement but the metric system.
I have not seen that.
Because, sometimes when we're describing a distance, we'll be like, 2 car lengths ahead. Or
Yeah.
There's a lot of examples of it, but it's pretty funny.
All right, well, guys, enough rambling. Let's jump in here and check out, is the metric system actually better?
The time has finally arrived. The comment section demanding imperial and metric units has gone on too long. There can only be one measurement system. The British imperial system, like everything British, is based on antiquated units of measurement, like measuring your country's importance by counting the number of countries you have invaded and pillaged. A measurement that made sense 100 years ago, but it's time to move on. Weirdly, the British have mostly moved on from this method of measurement, and it is instead Americans who insist on holding onto it.
Okay. I guess that makes sense. I never really thought about that. So the version of, what did he call it?
Are you talking about the British Imperial system?
Okay, so that's what we use currently.
Yeah.
I never thought about the fact that it originated in Britain.
Yeah.
And was brought here because of that, and we just never... So when did the metric system come about?
I have no idea, but one thing to say is it's a pretty large country here. So if we completely change over to the metric system, I'm guessing there would be a lot of changes,
Yeah. Aren't we the only country that doesn't do the metric system?
There's probably some other country out there, but I think we are basically the main country that doesn't really use it. But again, I think we do use it. It's just that we
pick and choose little.
We don't think about the moments we're using metric. We don't think of it in that way. But as a whole, yes, we still rely on the imperial system. We're still taught the imperial system in school.
I don't even like call it that. I don't know that's what it's called. Really.
I was never really, actually I may have been taught this. It's been so long since
I probably was,
school.
but yeah, I didn't feel any need to remember what it was called.
It wasn't ever something I remember it actually being called something. It was just we were taught measurements or whatever.
This is how we do it.
Yeah.
This is how some people do it.
Yeah, well, I'm sure I got taught a little bit of metric sometime, but it's not something that was taught enough to where I really remember it. You know what I mean? Same as you.
America, Liberia, and Myanmar, a prestigious trio. Now, I can already hear the people who refuse to wear masks in the comments. There are two kinds of countries, those that use the metric system and those that landed on the moon. You know who led the design team for the Saturn V? This guy. Listen to that deep Alabama accent.
This weight dictates the amount of fuel and the numbers of motors.
An American through and through. Ignore this photo of him. Those are just some German friends he made while on gap year in Europe. Look at all his friends. Let's count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 9 friends. A popular man. This Alabama native used metric. In fact, he despised British units. So much so that he designed a rocket during his gap year to fly to England to show them how great the metric system was. The Saturn V was designed, like nearly everything in NASA at the time, with a mixture of both metric and imperial units. Just read the mission reports for Apollo 11 for proof of this. It switches between inches and centimeters constantly. It's a mess. Anyone working with this report would have had to be hyper aware of what unit of measurement they were using.
That would have been really
Most of the design and science work was done in metric before being converted to imperial for the manufacturing and operational staff. One of the most mind-boggling examples of this is the guidance computer. It was coded in metric. Meters and kilograms are the language of science. But to ensure the astronauts could intuitively understand what those calculations meant, the displays inside the lunar module had to be displayed in British imperial units. So, even back then, when computer power was extremely limited, the engineers had to waste precious computational time and power to conversion. And this isn't just a waste of computation power. Errors in conversion have led to an insane number of accidents through the years. Some of the most notable being in NASA. In December 1998, the Mars Climate Orbiter took off from Cape Canaveral aboard its Delta II rocket. Over the course of its 9.5-month journey, the orbiter needed to complete trajectory correction maneuvers to bring it into an optimal orbit insertion altitude of 226 kilometers. However, as the time grew closer, calculations showed that the orbiter was entering Mars orbit in a far lower altitude, so low that it was likely going to strike the atmosphere and violently tear itself apart. This is exactly what happened. So, what went wrong? The orbiter was coded with metric units, so the thruster control unit was working with the metric unit for impulse, Newton seconds, but the controller was being supplied with pound force seconds, which differs by a conversion factor of 4.45. A massive discrepancy.
Yikes.
A discrepancy that destroyed a $328 million project. In 1983, an Air Canada flight departing from Montreal ran out of fuel halfway to its destination in Edmonton. Why? The ground crew knew 22,500 kilograms of fuel was needed for the flight. They, however, needed to calculate how many litres were needed to be pumped. So, they used the density ratio to convert the weight measurement to a volume measurement, but they used the 1.77 density ratio, which was pounds per litre, instead of the correct ratio of 0.8.
Oh, look at the difference. Look at the difference there.
Yikes.
That's insane.
I always hated this part of school.
You did?
The conversions and everything.
Here's what I'll say. I mean, like, we definitely, like, even if we don't use it on a regular basis, it makes sense that when it comes to actual building things of importance, like a jet, for example, the measurement should be the exact same. Uniform, period. That should be,
I don't know. Is it by now? Surely.
I think everybody, for the most part.
So he's just talking about in the past.
I think they've corrected most of that. But I'm saying, it makes sense that if you're in engineering, you should be using the system, which is the metric system, which is what most people use. It just makes sense. Even if in the rest of society in the U.S. we happen to not use that, when it comes to building things of importance, that should be like a mandatory
Universal,
thing.
yeah.
I'm guessing it is at this point, but it's amazing that it wasn't always that way.
Right, and that was pretty recent too.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Resulting in less than half the required fuel load being pumped aboard. Luckily, the pilot managed to glide the plane down to an abandoned airfield. But that little boo-boo of a conversion error could have resulted in a catastrophic loss of life. These are two cautionary tales with disastrous consequences, but it tells you nothing of the silent screams into the void every engineer in the world lets out when they are forced to work with both units. It's just an unnecessary pain in the ass we could all do without. This is the reason we need to choose one measurement system. Mixing units not only is tempting fate with conversion errors, but it costs an untold number of hours for scientists and engineers around the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, why in the world would that be a thing? I mean, it just doesn't even make sense, does it?
No, it really doesn't.
Banging their head against tables, when they could be using that time for something more productive. I could end the video there, but we need to really hammer home why metric units are the superior units. So why is it better? Well, let's start with the fundamental unit of measurement. There are 7 base units of measurement, and with these 7, we can measure everything in the universe. Think of them like the 3 primary colors of light. With these 3 colors, we can create any color in the universe by mixing them in just the correct proportions.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
We can do the same with these fundamental units of measurement. They are time, length, mass, temperature, electric current, chemical amount, and luminous intensity. With these measures, we can describe our universe. Velocity is a combination of length and time, volume is length cubed, density is volume combined with mass. These measurements are the language of the universe. So, let's see how the imperial system handles a very simple one, length. An inch is a standard unit of measurement for length in the imperial system. Let's imagine a scenario. You are designing a railing for a 1 mile long bridge. You, as a skilled and knowledgeable engineer, know that 2 half-inch bolts are more than enough to secure the railing down. The posts of the railing are 6 feet apart. Alright, how many inches are there in a foot? 12? So that's 72 inches. Every 72 inches we need 2 bolts. Our bridge is 1 mile long. How many feet is that? I don't know off the top of my head.
5,600.
And a quick Google search tells me it's 5,280 feet. What's 12 inches by 5,080? That's 63,360 inches. Divide that by 72, that's 880. So we need to order 1,760 half-inch bolts. That felt cumbersome.
Yeah.
Why do I need to remember all these numbers? Because imperial is a convoluted mess of measurement units invented by people who married their cousins. That's why. Now, let's see how much easier that is in metric. How many millimeters are there in a meter? It's in the name. Milli, 1,000. Now, how many meters are there in a kilometer? Once again, it's in the damn name, kilo, 1,000. Given a measurement in kilometers but want meters, just shift the decimal place over 3 places. No calculation needed. There is no room for error. It's a simply better system.
Maybe this is why I didn't enjoy that part of school and conversion and all that, because we use the imperial, so it's much more like going around your elbow to get to your butt kind of thing versus pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I look at it and I do see, like, you know, I remember in the past looking at the metric system. Like I said, it's been 2 years, you know, where I briefly looked at it. So, and I really haven't been using it because I don't really, I don't really even use measurements that much, to be honest. You know, it's one of those things I just grab a calculator or whatever.
Right.
But, you know, it's interesting that I can see what people were saying. They were saying, like, it's so much easier. And I can see that once you've learned it, like, especially if you learned it in school.
If you grow up learning it.
Right.
Yeah.
If you grow up learning it, I can see how it's easier. But, like, me using the imperial system all my life, it feels easy to me. And I've never used the other on a consistent basis, so it's hard for me personally on a personal level to really comprehend just how much easier it is. Although I can see, if I was taught that from the beginning, that makes sense. And I'm hoping that Sophia in school will be learning the metric system more than we were.
Well, if not, we can teach her.
Yeah, I think no matter what, even if we don't use it in the U.S., I think that it's a good thing to know. Because, like, you know, who knows what she wants to do with her life.
Depending on your career field or whatever.
It's good to learn that as a kid, and then you go on and you know it. I mean, granted, though, like, if you're, you know, you might learn it, but if she never uses it again, she probably will forget it. You know, so, anyway.
Even within imperial, you have to constantly convert your units. Ounces to pounds, pounds to imperial tons, which for some reason differs from a metric ton by 1.6%. Again, in metric, there are 1,000 grams in a kilogram and 1,000 kilograms in a ton. In imperial, there are 16 ounces in a pound and 2,240 pounds in an imperial ton.
That's true.
Why? You aren't even following the same conversion conventions as your other units. This is insanely cumbersome. The chances of conversion errors even within your own damn system is high. Never mind having to convert to metric. You know what's even more insane? The word for mass and weight in the imperial system is the same. Why? Because the pound was invented before we knew what gravity was. That's why. We just assumed mass and weight were the same thing when they aren't. So we have to specify in imperial whether we mean pound mass or pound force. I haven't been this confused since I watched Magic Mike. The most ridiculous thing about all of this, every single one of these imperial measurements are legally defined by the metric system. America is already using the metric system, and most of the population is oblivious to it.
We don't even know it, right?
Freedom, America, guns, pew pew. The foot is legally defined as 0.3048 meters.
Wow.
Pound is legally defined by 0.435
I don't remember
kilograms.
this.
Why? Because the metric system is run by the International Bureau of Weights and Measures, a neutral international organization whose sole mission is to create a global language of science, who America is a member of. And they have succeeded in an awe-inspiring way. In 2019, the final metric base unit, the kilogram, stopped being defined by human artifacts and is now, like all other metric units, defined by the laws of physics.
I think that's great, you know, and it's kind of surprising that there's a central body for it, although I think that's a really good thing. You know, but, you know, I never really knew that. I don't remember that from when I was looking into metrics briefly.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. I think it all just needs to go to one universal system.
I mean, I really don't understand why it hasn't. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Stubbornness, like stuck in.
I mean, it could be something to do with just how large the country is, and maybe it would change so much that it would be cumbersome to actually change it. But you would think at some point that needs to happen because, like, going into the future, technology,
especially with more space travel, more of the science advancements, you're gonna need more accuracy.
Yeah, because everything's going to be more, everybody's going to be working together more globally on these different, you know, engineering things and technology and whatnot. So they need to be able to have a
standard form of communication and understanding.
That to me that blows my mind, honestly, that like our measurements are technically based off of the metric system, yet why are they not metric? Like, it doesn't even make sense.
In 2019, it ceased being defined by this hunk of metal and began being defined by Planck's constant, which is defined as 6.626 by 10 to the minus 34 kilogram meter squared per second. Of course, to use this as a definition, we need ways to define the meter and second. The meter is defined as the length of the path traveled by light in a vacuum in 1 divided by 299,792,458 of a second. Okay, so how do we define a second? A second is defined by the hyperfine transition frequency, which is the frequency of radiation which will cause an electron to jump from two closely spaced low energy states in a cesium-133 atom. Each of the base units are defined like this, using the unchanging language of the universe as its yardstick, or should I say, meter stick. It's a beautiful and inspiring language that transcends the realm of humans, and for that reason alone, you should strive to use the metric system. Understanding the language of the universe is a superpower.
I agree. I mean, I totally agree with him. Now that I've heard the explanation, I don't see why it's still a thing. I guess it's still a thing that we're in science, especially, and engineering and technology and all that, why we aren't using the same unit of measurement.
Yeah, I will say this, that like, you know, I've never personally had a problem using the imperial system.
Well, that's because we've never really had to face the other alternative.
Well, we have when we went overseas, but like it was, again, it's like one of those things, unless you're in a field where you do a lot of measuring, it's not something, like I don't come across measurements in my day-to-day life really.
But because we never experienced the metric system growing up, really,
right,
we don't know how much easier it might have been.
No, I that's what I'm saying. I'm saying though, like, I would like Sophia to learn the metric system, and I'm with you. I think it's ridiculous that we aren't just on board with the rest of the world basically at this point. And even if we use the imperial system for our daily lives in terms of like a yard, you know, a football field is 100 yards, for example, and that type of thing, you know, it makes sense that our kids, I don't know if they are. I don't know if kids today are learning the metric system in the U.S. I just know in my day, we weren't really, it wasn't something that was taught at least on a large scale or something. We didn't really learn it in and out. And I think maybe that's because, generally speaking, on our day-to-day lives, it's just not something we came across that much.
But it is weird, though, like, even though I didn't grow up using the metric system, I can still recognize in school how convoluted, and I didn't know why it felt like that, but how insane it felt to do all these different conversions and calculations to come up with this other number. It just seems backwards and
it does.
Overcomplicated.
It does, and it obviously the greater your day and specifically your career or your employment relies on measurements,
the more important
it becomes, especially as you get into working on an international scale. You know, I think for someone like you or I, we don't really measure things on a regular basis, so we just don't feel it. You know, like even though I understand that we actually do use the metric system in some regards with measurements, using tools, and things like that, but it's not something we've ever had to really think about, oh, this is the metric system. You know what I mean? It's not something we've ever really needed to know.
We don't put much thought into it.
Right, don't put much thought in it. I think
it just is what it is.
Now, if you are looking into this and you're like, you work with numbers on a daily basis, it makes sense that this is something you've given a lot more thought to. But like, I just know, for example, to myself what a pound means. Therefore, I just use the pound. We use mile per hour everywhere for our speed, you know.
But isn't that something they do in the UK as well?
In the UK, they do a mixture, and I still haven't fully grasped the mixture. But here's something interesting about the UK. Their gallon size, for example, is different size than our gallon. If we took a gallon of milk, it would be different from their gallon of milk.
Yeah, I think I've read that in the comments before, like when we were doing recipes and stuff. People were like, be sure if it's a British recipe to check.
So I know that the UK uses a mixture, but they, from what I understand, they generally
still learn the metric.
They learn the metric system, and they use it for, I think, most of their measurements. But they still use mile per hour. But they use. I think you guys use stones. I don't. I think a stone is 14 pounds, if I'm not mistaken, or something like that.
That always confused me. I didn't understand that.
This is something, obviously, we definitely have a long way to go to really grasp. I get the gist of it, though, don't you? I mean, don't you really? You understand? Can you see how, if you learn it, it can be easier?
Oh yeah, I thought you were asking me if I knew what it was.
No, but you can see how moving a decibel over
is much simpler.
It's much simpler than like, oh, there's
having to remember these equations.
Goodness. Yeah, I don't even know where to begin with that. It can be pretty complex, but it's like all things. If you learn it and it's all you've ever known, it just doesn't seem complex until maybe you're comparing it to something else.
Presented with an alternative.
Yeah.
is easier.
But again, even with being presented to that, I don't really know in my day-to-day life where I would actually apply it. How could I, like...
Baking is one that comes to mind.
That's one, but if you...
But I know the imperial system, so for me, it's easy to be like, 16 ounces is a pound, like you were saying, and yeah.
And here's the thing: if you're using a cookbook or a recipe that was written in the imperial system,
I will say though, like in regards to recipes, it is very difficult to have and double and quadruple recipes when you're dealing with like weird cup measurements.
Oh yeah.
So I could see if I learned the metric system how it might be easier.
Yeah.
In that regard.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe we will do that. Maybe we'll learn the metric system just so that we know it. I don't know, guys.
Say we do.
I don't know what resource we should look at to actually learn it. I feel like if we dived into it, it probably would be relatively simple to actually learn.
Yeah, in practice.
1,000, but the kilograms, kilometers, and all that. But just looking at it before like diving in, it does seem a little bit complex to learn. But I'm sure it's much easier than it seems on the surface. I'm sure someone that learned the metric system and then tries to learn the imperial system, that might actually be more like complicated.
Yeah, probably.
So I think it might actually be easier to learn the metric system. But guys, what do you think? I'm sure that most of you learned the metric system growing up in school, and I wouldn't be surprised if you actually use it in some regard in your day-to-day lives through cooking or through I don't know, through kilometers sometimes, I suppose. Some people count in kilometers and kilograms and all that. And this is a big one, right? Think about this. This is one that I recognize that Brits specifically would absolutely use on a regular basis when it comes to the metric system. Have you seen on their packaging for food, it's a certain amount of grams.
Kilograms.
Grams specifically.
Grams and kilograms.
Yeah, and like, we don't generally notice that.
In the Aldi ads that we've been sent, it'll say like 3 kilograms of potatoes per blank.
And we're like sitting there.
We do it by pounds, so it's like
500 grams.
Yeah.
500 grams of something, and it's like I have no idea really how much that weighs. You know what I mean? It's very interesting.
Oh, unless you're a drug dealer, then you
know. Yeah, I suppose that's true.
I guess here
that's true. That's true. That's one area that Americans would probably use the metric system. If you're an American drug dealer, you probably use the metric system. That's very true. Oh. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for stopping by. Please click that like button. Feel free to drop your comments and suggestions about this video or others. And don't forget to subscribe to continue to follow us on our journey. Until next time, guys. Peace.
Bye.